From Global, leading Britain's conversation, The Nigel Farage Show.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Just after 7:30 this morning, a Ford Fiesta with one driver, no other passengers, crashed into the barriers outside the Palace of Westminster, outside the entrance, the Peers entrance to the House of Lords, leading to a Donald Trump tweet which said, "Another terrorist attack in London. These animals are crazy and must be dealt with toughness and with strength." Well, if you've been at work all day, you may not have caught up with this story. Let's go straight down to Westminster and speak to our reporter, Lucy Hough. Lucy, good evening.
Evening, Nigel. Yes, a few hours ago, the streets here in Westminster were on lockdown. There was a huge police cordon in place from here in Parliament Square all the way down Whitehall, across Westminster Bridge and along Millbank as well. But that's now lifted and police are now focusing on that immediate area outside Parliament where this suspected attack happened this morning. And of course, we now know about these 3 addresses being searched in Birmingham and Nottingham in connection with what happened here this morning. So just a recap on what happened. Just a few metres from where I am now, that silver car was seen driving at speed from Parliament Square, swinging right towards Westminster Abbey, where it ploughed into cyclists and pedestrians before crashing into a security barrier. These eyewitnesses told LBC what they saw.
We were doing lives for ITV on Abingdon Green, and I just ran across, when we heard the bang, we saw 2 guys running down past Parliament, so we thought, right, let's go up and see what's happening. And I started shooting, and there was a car that had hit the barrier, a silver car, which smoke was coming out of. And while we were filming, all the police were there was a bus static there as well. And then 6 4x4s shot past us, and armed police jumped out and jumped over the barrier, and they were pointing in the car, and they looked like they were pulling someone from the vehicle.
Now, the response of the emergency services was instantaneous. The man was pulled at gunpoint from the vehicle and arrested on suspicion of terror offences. He hasn't yet been formally identified, but we know that he's 29 and a UK national. He wasn't previously known to police or MI5, and he's now being held at a South London police station. The head of counter-terror, Neil Basu, at the Met said this is being treated as a terrorist investigation.
At this early stage of the investigation, no other suspects at the scene have been identified or reported to police. There is no intelligence at this time of further danger to Londoners or the rest of the UK connected to this incident.
So we know that silver Ford Fiesta that was used this morning left Birmingham late last night, and it arrived here in London just after midnight. It was then seen in and around the Westminster area around 90 minutes before this suspected attack took place. But here at the scene, that police cordon in the immediate area where the attack happened is still in place. And of course, those searches of those 3 addresses in the Midlands happening now, and that 29-year-old suspect still in custody here in London.
And we do know that he was born abroad, don't we?
Yes, we have had confirmation from Ben Wallace, the Security Minister, that he was born abroad, but he is being described as a UK national, 29 years old. And we did see some pictures of him being pulled from the car this morning, but no formal identification from police at this stage.
And he's still a suspect, and we understand that. Lucy, is there a thought here? And I do understand 3 addresses in Birmingham are being looked at, but here we have one person in a Ford Fiesta crashing into the barriers and, yes, hurting some pedestrians and cyclists. For most of the day, there have been screens up around the Palace of Westminster, around the car, massive road closures, dozens of police cars, helicopters everywhere. Is there a sense in Westminster that the response to this is proportionate or perhaps a little over the top?
Well, I think there's pride about the response. I mean, it was instantaneous. We've heard comments from both the Prime Minister and the London Mayor Sadiq Khan praising the courage of the emergency services, who really did manage to nip this in the bud. But of course, 3 people injured, but fortunately no fatalities. But the police response was huge. I mean, all afternoon
massive,
there's been police helicopters circling above me. The road closures have been enormous across Westminster Bridge, down Whitehall and in and around the Westminster area. So whether or not it's proportional or not. I think they obviously were acting as if perhaps the previous, within March of last year, the attack involving Khaled Masood, who did, of course, kill PC Keith Palmer. The response was proportionate to an attack of that nature. But this man now in custody in a South London police station. I think we'll get more information.
We'll find out more
about motive somewhat later down the line.
As we get any news, Lucy, let us know. Thank you very much indeed. Well, that's been dominating the news today, but there is another story that I am particularly interested in, and it is, of course, that Jeremy Corbyn, who, remember we discussed Jeremy Corbyn last night, I said to you, I thought he looked very, very shifty when he was asked about this wreath laying at the Palestine, Martyrs Cemetery, and he said yesterday, I was present when it was laid, but I don't think I was actually involved in it. OK. Today, Jeremy Corbyn has said, I laid one wreath, along with many other people, in memory, as I've said, of those who died in the awful attack in 1985. So we've gone from not really actually being involved in it to saying, I laid a wreath. A lot of you last night rang up to defend Corbyn, to say the press had it in for him. Well, I'm going to go for a bit more independent opinion, I hope, this evening. I'm going to go to James Serene, who is the CEO at BICOM, an independent British research centre producing analysis, insight and commentary to promote a greater understanding of Israel and the Middle East in the UK. James, good evening.
Hi, good evening.
So, there does appear to be a quite significant backtracking in Jeremy Corbyn's position today.
Well, I think he's sort of gone all over the place on this one, but I think where we are now is he is saying he laid a wreath, and the last interview I saw, he was saying he did lay a wreath, but it's part of his whole strategy that you have to basically have dialogue with everyone and pay tribute to everyone. But yeah, it doesn't really stand up.
I've not seen him go to Israel and pay tribute to people there, have you?
No, I mean, he was asked that question, I believe, on a Channel 4 News interview, and he said he had been to Israel, but there's no evidence that I know of that he's met with or been to any particular memorials to Israelis who've died in terrorist attacks. And I think the thing about this particular Munich attack that we need to try and understand, this is not just any terrorist attack. I mean, Israel suffered from terrorist attacks really since it was created in 1948. But this was a very specific moment in Israeli history.
Is it appropriate now, James, for him to apologise for firstly for being there, which was wholly inappropriate in the view of many, but secondly, shouldn't he apologise for trying willfully to mislead us over the last 48 hours?
Well, I think there's a very real issue here about trust, and I think both on the public level and also for the media that they're going to find it very difficult to trust what him and the Labour Party press office is saying in the future, because they've clearly been lying to the media about this and going all over the place. I think he could apologise. I think he could apologise for misleading people, and he could apologise for any offence caused by him laying his wreath, and he could reach out to the widows of the athletes that were killed at the Munich Olympics attack and apologise. There is a route for him to do that. I don't think he will.
No, he seems steadfastly not to want to. And yet, do you think there's any way he can actually recover reputationally from this?
Well, I think the issue here is that his base don't really seem to mind about any of this, seem to believe that it's all the smears, all created. Yep. They believe that the entire anti-Semitism crisis is engineered by the media. So they don't seem to worry about any of this. There was some anecdotal evidence of people on social media and elsewhere feeling a little bit misled and a little bit sent round the houses on this particular story. They defended him at the beginning, and then it turns out he did lay the wreath and he did do it. I think the issue here is that where this has ended up is that Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel criticised him, and that took potentially him and the Labour Party in a more comfortable place, which was just in a spat with the Israeli Prime Minister that they like to sort of put up as a kind of bogeyman of all things terrible in the Middle East. So that actually placed him somewhere a little bit more comfortable and away from the actual very difficult issue about why he just won't adopt this internationally recognised definition of anti-Semitism.
So it's a never-ending battle. And he seems to be the old Dennis Healey maxim of when in a hole, stop digging. And Jeremy Corbyn, to me, James, appears to go on digging.
Well, on this particular issue, he made a choice a very long time ago that he would express his support for the Palestinian cause, not by reaching out to Israelis and Palestinians and people of all different views. He made a choice to reach out to and spend time with the worst kind of extremists, anti-Semites, Holocaust deniers, whatever they said, he just seemed to be very comfortable spending time with them. And he's been doing that for a very, very long time. And the very definition that the Jewish community wants him to adopt actually is there to try and draw a red line into that kind of behaviour. And there's an argument that says the reason why he won't adopt it is because it would mean him having to apologise and disown pretty much what he's been doing for the last 30 years.
For 35 years. No, that's right. But, James, you made the point that the Labour base, his key support group, see this as a smear. In your view, is this his downfall, or does it make no difference to his position as Labour leader?
Well, I think, time will tell. I think there's a very real issue here, potentially, about some of those undecided voters looking at him and thinking, is this someone I can trust with, Britain's foreign relations and with the security of the country? And if he kind of bungles his way into a cemetery full of, people who masterminded terrible terrorist attacks and didn't sort of manage to actually see the danger and then at least get himself out of the scandal after it erupted, it doesn't look very good in terms of being able to actually lead Britain's foreign relations on the world.
No, and Middle England will not like it. James, thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. That was James Serene, CEO at BICOM, an Israel and Middle East think tank, and he is very critical of Jeremy Corbyn, but he makes the point, and many of his base don't believe it. So let's just remind ourselves, this was Jeremy Corbyn yesterday.
I was present when it was laid. I don't think I was actually involved in it.
OK. Let's try Jeremy Corbyn today.
I laid one wreath along with many other people in memory, as I've said, of all those who died in the awful attack.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Do you think Jeremy Corbyn can survive this? And if you think, yep, he's Teflon, his supporters love him, it makes no difference, call 0345 6060 973, or maybe you think this actually would be his downfall, in which case text to 84850. Or maybe like me you think it won't be his downfall, he'll stay as the Labour leader, but Middle England, as we call it, will turn against him electorally. He actually, despite the Tories' problems, is now in many ways doomed. If that's how you feel, tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and of course watch us live on Facebook and comment there too. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusive on LBC, and it's now 16 minutes past 7. Jeremy Corbyn defends himself very strongly about these charges of anti-Semitism. He says, I quote, "People who dish out anti-Semitic poison need to understand you do not do it in my name." He said earlier on in the month in an article that it was a real problem within the Labour Party and he was working to overcome it. And yet, when he's asked to pick up the internationally accepted definition of anti-Semitism, he steadfastly refuses to do so. And when it comes to these photographs, and yeah, I get it, folks, they first appeared in the Daily Mail. They are not Jeremy Corbyn fans. But one does get the impression that somehow he's been trying to cover this up. Because yesterday, when he was asked about the wreath laying and what his role was, this is what he said.
I was present when it was laid. I don't think I was actually involved in it.
So, not actually involved in it. He just happened to be there. And yet, under pressure, today he says this.
I laid one wreath along with many other people in memory, as I've said, of all those who died in the awful attack.
Yeah, but the others that were there weren't leader of Her Majesty's loyal opposition, and that's really the point. And I think this is an issue. My own view, folks, for what it's worth, is that Corbyn is in big trouble over this. I thought all of this would come out a long time ago. I thought his lengthy association with some really undesirable people would hold him below the waterline. It seems that he kept on going on that post-general election wave and Glastonbury and all the rest of it. But he's now in real trouble. He's in real trouble with Middle England and Middle Wales and Middle Scotland. But I don't think he's in trouble with his own people. Very interesting tweet put out today by Lewis Goodall, who's a political reporter for Sky. And Goodall said, "Big turnout for the Jeremy Corbyn event in Stoke-on-Trent tonight. Over 400 activists. Everyone we spoke to agreed Corbyn is being smeared Labour does not have a problem with anti-Semitism, and that the whole thing is largely concocted by the media and the Tories. His base is solid. Now, Lewis Goodall is a former Guardian writer and was a Labour supporter. Of course, he wouldn't be now, would he? He's working for Sky News. So, he may be coming at it from that perspective. But my impression of so many of the phone calls we had last night is we had very strong Corbyn supporters ringing up last night saying it's all a load of old tosh. Folks, I think electorally this is doing him absolutely huge damage. I think he's doomed electorally, if not in terms of being Labour Party leader. Hey, I've said too much. What do you think? Richard, new caller from Manchester. Good evening.
Yeah, hi. Good evening, Nigel. So nobody is smearing Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn is smearing himself. Mm-hmm. The expression, "Oh, what a tangled web we weave as we practice to deceive," is becoming more and more obvious. When he's put under pressure, he then suddenly remembers that he laid a wreath at a cemetery in Tunisia, where there were included in those who had died with the Israeli attack were Black September terrorists. And I'd just like to remind your listeners that these Black September terrorists kidnapped 11 Jewish Israeli athletes.
Yep.
And this is why it's important to remember the two, because many people like to separate the two, but it's becoming increasingly difficult to do that. And then in cold blood, murdered them, and they were at what was an international sporting event. Now, how you can be seen laying a wreath either directly at that memorial or very close to it is beyond belief. From a man that would not even visit Yad Vashem, which is the Jewish Holocaust memorial for the death of 6 million Jews.
But Richard, I completely understand this, and as I say, when he talks about wanting to be a man of peace and settling disputes, he clearly is partisan on one side and not the other. But Richard, my guess is you were never a Corbyn supporter anyway.
Well, that's where you're wrong.
All right, okay.
I actually have been historically a Labour voter. And when he came to power, I was quite enthused. It was very refreshing to see how he dealt with question time when he was referring to individual people and so on and so forth. But over the period of time, I've just become disillusioned as a voter, as have his colleagues in Parliament, because the man speaks with a forked tongue. He talks the talk of there isn't a racist bone in my body, and yet the way that he acts would suggest that he is, by deed, anti-Semitic. And the problem that people don't understand is that anti-Zionism and anti-Israel has become a smokescreen behind which anti-Semites can hide.
Well, a lot of people say that, Richard. He, of course, would defend himself. But very quickly, Richard, can I just ask you, would he stay on as Labour leader?
I think if Labour wants to have a hope of winning a general election, they need to have a new leader. There's no question about it. He is, unfortunately...
Well, I tell you what, Richard.
Bad product.
I bet you they don't. Because Ed Miliband opened the door to all those £3 members, and those £3 members love Jezza, for right or wrong. Thank you. Taxi for Jeremy, I think, says Dee from Kent. What is it about Jezza that scares you, Nigel? Because it seems all you comfortable off types are doing all you can to stop him getting to number 10. Nick in Norfolk. What scares me are his friendships and associations with the IRA, with Hamas, with Hezbollah, with a whole strain of very deeply unpleasant, nasty terrorist people. And on top of that, the fact that I think he would absolutely wreck the economy by taking us back to 1970s taxes. And Nick, I don't know when you were born. I'm old enough to remember what the 70s was like. The brain drain, people leaving, bad times for this country. I very much hope he doesn't get to number 10, even though he's been a Brexiteer solidly in Parliament since 1983. Let's go to Hackney and speak to Ansel, another new caller to the show. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Thank you for taking my call. First of all, actually, slightly off tangent. I'm old enough to remember the 70s as well. I'm 60 years old, so I was there.
It was pretty grim, wasn't it?
Well, no, not at all. No, I remember it being the halcyon days. But anyway...
hang on a second. No, whoa. 27% inflation, bailed out with the International Monetary Fund. Most of our bright youngsters go to Australia and America. It was a disaster.
Nigel, how old were you?
Well, I'm 54, so I'm just a boy compared to you, obviously. But
you're a youngster.
But I do remember our bright young people leaving the country in droves.
Dear, really curious. Anyway, however, let's move on to what we were talking about. Now, the first thing. Are
you taking the mickey, or do you really think the 70s were great days?
No, I was there. I'm 6 years older than you. I was there, and I was a teenager. I was a teenager in the 70s, and quite frankly, it was halcyon days as far as I'm concerned. But anyway, moving on.
Right, okay.
Moving on.
We're going to struggle with this, but I'm listening. I really am. I promise you.
No. I've got two questions. just two questions. Okay. Yeah. The first question is: can you tell me who actually was awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace in 1993?
No, actually, the point, Ansel, of the show is that this is not Mastermind. I mean, I can do a sort of charity one if you want.
No, let's move on.
But I'm asking you a question. I'm asking you a question. Do you think,
yes,
and Ansel, even as a passionate Labour man, which clearly you are, even you must admit that those two clips, the clip of what he said yesterday and what he said today, do at least cause some doubt in people's minds?
Well, actually, for the informed, no. So let me tell you, it was Nelson Mandela. Can you tell me the difference between the ANC and Hamas?
Look, Nelson Mandela did some stuff that he got put in prison for, and we fully understand that. However, the battle then, Ansel, was about a policy. The battle then was about a policy called apartheid. The dispute in the Middle East. I mean, has Jeremy Corbyn ever, has he said anything? Has he attended memorial services for those killed by the Brighton bombing? Has he ever shown?
We're talking about exceptionalism.
Right. So listen, Ansel, apart from telling us that the 1970s are the best time that ever happened, so you think that Corbyn is undamaged by this? Is that the view I get from you?
No, not at all. No, because he's clearly being damaged because it's a campaign to damage him. Okay. Of course.
And so why wasn't he straighter with us on it?
But I think he's been as straight as he can be. In actual fact, he's been pilloried, and it's a witch hunt. It's nonsense. If only people could substantiate anything that they were saying, then that would be fine.
Right, Ansel,
let's deal with facts.
Ansel, I'm going to deal with facts, and thank you for the call. And I think it's important. You know, Ansel, big Corbyn supporter, says he's been absolutely straight with us. Let's just listen once again. Remember, this story appeared in the Daily Mail on the front pages. There he was, and we were told he'd laid a wreath at a ceremony at a Palestinian martyrs cemetery, amongst which, not solely, but amongst which were people who'd perpetrated that barbarous act in 1972. When questioned about this yesterday, this is what he said.
I was present when it was laid. I don't think I was actually involved in it.
All right, perfectly clear. I was present, but not actually involved. Here he is, 24 hours later.
I laid one wreath along with many other people in memory, as I've said, of all those who died in the awful attack.
Couldn't be much clearer to me. And I did say last night, didn't I, that if you saw the interview of him yesterday, he looked very shifty, eyes wandering all round the room. You may or may not think that Jeremy Corbyn allows anti-Semitism to breathe within the Labour Party, but what I would love to hear you tell me is that actually he's been consistent and straight with this story. Because, folks, he hasn't, and I think he's badly damaged by it. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It is now 7:30 and time for the news with Thomas Watt. Corbyn's not been playing with a straight bat when it comes to his association with that wreath-laying that took place in the Palestinian martyrs ceremony. He is in some trouble, I think, with the country, but maybe not with his own party members. But before I get back to that, Sweden is a country that I knew in the 1980s and 1990s when I was in business, when I had a proper job. And I can't imagine a more relaxed, peaceful or contented place. You know, friends of mine that lived, even living in the big cities, said they didn't even bother to lock their doors when they went to work in the morning. Well, boy, things have changed in Sweden. And overnight last night, we saw in Helsingborg, in Gothenburg, in Stockholm, in 4 Swedish cities, we saw up to 80 cars being set alight in the middle of the night in something that the Prime Minister, Stefan Löfven, said looks like a very coordinated, almost like a military operation. So you've got, large scale unrest, anarchy, virtually, breaking out in those inner city centres in Sweden. I've commented before on this programme about the rapid rise of crime, the rapid rise, in particular in places like Malmö, of sexual crime. And I've commented on this before. And I'm afraid that Sweden is now not in a great place. They have accepted, per capita, far more people from the Middle East and North Africa than any other European country. Integration has been a disaster. You have an alienated community living in those cities of people with a completely different attitude towards life and different culture. Things are not good. They're not pretty. And on the 9th of September, there is a general election in Sweden. And I think, be prepared for another big shock in European politics. You will see a party whose roots back in the 1980s were indisputably that of a National Socialist Party. It's now cleaned up its act, and it's going to do incredibly well in those elections. The funny thing is that there's been almost no coverage of this story about Sweden overnight in much of the UK mainstream media. Comments, but not much. But I think with those elections just round the corner, long hot summer, it is one to watch. Let's get back to Corbyn. How badly damaged is he? Can he survive this? I think he will. Let's go to Tel Aviv in Israel and speak to David, a new caller to this show. Now, David, I'm going to guess, living where you do, you're not a Corbyn fan.
I am not, and I grew up my whole life in the UK, and I left England because of the rise of the anti-Semitic in the UK.
David,
so many of my friends of mine.
David, whereabouts were you living?
I was living in Hackney.
You see, I know people in Brussels that are leaving Brussels because they say it's just intolerable for their children to live there anymore. Are there many people like you leaving London for that reason?
It's so many. Majority of my family have moved to Israel. Besides my mum and dad, everyone practically lives in Israel, and hopefully one day my parents will come too.
Why, David, in your view, and this is slightly separate from the Corbyn question, but why, David, why is there a rise in anti-Semitism, so much so you felt like leaving London?
There's many different reasons why. The many reasons people always blame is because of Israel. And they think it's a separate thing. I don't think that people want to knock, and you can see it's a double standard. Just a couple of days ago with Boris Johnson with the burqa, even the Prime Minister came on, commented on Boris Johnson, what he says. Now, when it comes to Jeremy Corbyn, you can see the double standards over and over again. There's nothing from the Prime Minister. There's nothing from anyone. No one's condemning it. And you see this time and time again, the double standards when they compare Israel. Even I could give you a couple of days ago, the rockets attacking was around about in 24 hours last week was 135 rockets who landed into Israel. Israel done one missile attack. Was all over BBC. Not one report about Israel, but the rocket attacks into Israel.
I mean, David, this is a very familiar complaint that I hear. I hear the BBC are on the Palestinian side, not the Israeli side, and I have heard that debate
over and over again against the Jewish people.
But David, we have a Labour leader, now facing some very serious accusations. Do you think, and albeit I know you've emigrated, but do you think that what's been said by Corbyn himself will damage him?
I don't think so. No, I think the whole country has gone so left and so blinded. I think they're just going to. There's many people. I think even the youngsters in the UK are big fans of Corbyn. I don't think as a political, I do not think he did anything it would damage him. And in fact, especially in the UK, and that's the main reason why I left, he's going to stay there. And it's probably one day, and I feel sorry for Israel, if we have a guy like Jeremy Corbyn comes the Prime Minister.
OK, David, thank you for your call and for your story. Fascinating story. Nigel, stop bashing Corbyn. Mrs Mayhem is our problem and her love of the EU. Tom in Basingstoke, I do get your point. I don't think I'm bashing Corbyn. I'm merely pointing out that I said last night on the show that I felt he looked a little bit less than sincere. I was being quite gentle about it, really, wasn't I? I could have just said he was lying. And it's pretty clear from what's been said today compared to yesterday that he's got himself into a situation where he simply could not tell the truth. But Tom, I'm making the point, he will stay as Labour leader, and I believe that very, very strongly. The Corbyn supporting caller before the news said Corbyn is being as straight as he can be. I think he's right, says Malcolm in Northampton. Johnny in Norfolk says Corbyn's finished. I think he'll quit, rather than splitting the left-wing vote with the Blairite breakaway party, which is now surely a certainty. Johnny, he's not going anywhere. He's not quitting, he's staying there. The base love him. Look what Lewis Goodall, Sky News political reporter, said about the Stoke-on-Trent meeting of 400 activists tonight. They love him. They believe in him. They see all of this as being, I guess, in Trumpian terms, what Corbyn could say is fake news. Because that's kind of what people say when the press are attacking them. I don't think he's been damned by the Daily Mail and the pictures. I think he's been damned by his own words and his shifting and changing of the story. That, I think, is what's damaging him. Let's see what David, a new caller from Ealing, makes of all of this. Good evening, David.
Good evening, Nigel. There's two issues here that have been deliberately conflated.
All right.
One is that in that cemetery there were people that had been buried that were the original terrorists in the 1972 Olympic Games terrorist action.
Yes.
But there were also people in there, which Jeremy Corbyn was holding the wreath for, was for the PLO headquarters attacked by Israel in 1982.
85, I think it was, wasn't it? Or?
Well, 85, yes, yeah. It was 85. So the 85 attack by Israel, which killed a lot of innocent people in the PLO headquarters, was what he was laying the wreath for, and the memorial was for that, not for the Olympic terrorists. And if you go to a cemetery, for instance, you're laying some flowers at a grave, might be a relative of yours or a friend, you don't inquire about everyone that's buried in that ceremony and that cemetery and find out if they're criminals or whatever.
David, firstly, I did point out tonight that that cemetery was not exclusively the 1972 terrorists. So, and I did last night make the argument, about 1985 and 1992, and there were other people there. But David, if I go to a cemetery to lay some flowers on a grave, I could be in somewhere in North London, and Karl Marx could be next door. It doesn't make me a Marxist to go and lay flowers on a grave in a public British cemetery. When the sign on the door says that it's a Palestinian martyrs cemetery, you would have thought, would you not, that good taste would have said to Jeremy Corbyn, I really ought to be careful here. There's some serious warning bells here, and I'm not going to get involved.
No, I disagree. I mean, if you're talking about the thousands of martyrs that have been killed by the Israelis over the years, and there are a lot of them in that cemetery, then why would you concentrate on the fact that a few in the other end of the ceremony or some cemetery are terrorists from the 1972 Olympic Games?
Okay, no, David, you've made your point.
There's two different issues, and they're deliberately being conflated by the propaganda.
So why didn't? All right, David. Let's take your point, and it is a reasonable point. I've made it myself. You've made it more strongly than I did, but that others were there too. But David, if that's the case, why didn't Jeremy Corbyn just say that?
Well, I think he did, actually. But it hasn't been reported. I think he.
Well, do you want to have a listen, David? Do you want to have a listen to what I said? Stay with me. Have a listen to what Jeremy Corbyn said about this yesterday.
I was present when it was laid. I don't think I was actually involved in it.
Okay, he was present when it was laid. He wasn't involved in it. And had that been the case, David, I think we could have said that Corbyn realised that he'd get dragged into a political problem because of some of the people that were buried there and some of the appalling things that they'd done. And yet, David, here he is today.
No, but that's
I laid one wreath along with many other people in memory, as I've said, of all those who died in the awful attack.
So when people start changing their stories, David, like that, it does send out an alarm bell, doesn't it?
But it's not. But I disagree. Look, he hasn't changed his story. He's talking about the attack on the PLO headquarters, not about the Olympic Games attack.
Well, what he's talking about, David, whether he was present and involved in a ceremony or whether he was actively a part of it. David, can I just ask you quickly, are you a Labour Party member?
I am officially, yes, I am, but I'm thinking of leaving, actually.
Are you? But not because of Jeremy, obviously.
Well, in a sort of way, yes, because Jeremy is being far too defensive. He's playing the game. It was a big mistake playing this apology game when there's nothing to apologise. By apologising, he's actually making himself look bad. He should be on the offensive and say, look, I was there to as a peace conference and to lay a wreath on all of the people who have died as martyrs by the Israeli attacks. The Israelis have killed thousands.
And so have the Palestinians, David, and all sorts of suicide. David, I thank you for your call. Well, I have to say, David thinks Corbyn should be tougher. I am shocked of Leicester Square. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's now 7:46. Some of you still coming on, defending Jeremy Corbyn, saying he's absolutely right, he's got nothing to apologise for. And I guess if you take the very pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel line with this long-running dispute, maybe that's what you would think. I don't know, but I don't think you can call yourself a man of peace and then take a partisan side quite the way that Corbyn has, and then, when it comes out, not be truthful. But before I get back to that, George Osborne, do you remember him? That's right, he was the Chancellor for 6 years. He was the Chancellor of the Exchequer during the referendum campaign, who told us that a vote to leave would represent an immediate and profound shock to our economy. It would push us into a recession. It would lead to an increase, remember, immediate and profound shock if you voted Brexit, would lead to an increase in unemployment of over 500,000. GDP will be 3.6% smaller. Average real wages would be lower. Well, Mr. Osborne, even though Brexit is being bungled and we're not taking the full advantage of it that we should, but despite all of that, and since that vote that you told us would be a catastrophe, the Office of National Statistics figures out today, 2 years after that vote to leave, show that UK unemployment has fallen by 65,000 to 1.36 million. That is the lowest it has been since 1975, despite the fact our population is 12 million bigger than it was then. And the good news is that wages are up by 2.7%. Whilst the numbers still coming to Britain are far bigger than I would like to see, the numbers coming to Britain are slightly down because we're told of the Brexit vote. So let's just work this out. More people in work, and those that are earning more money. And still, on Brexit, all we ever hear is a constant diet of negativity. Back to Corbyn. Is he fatally damaged, or will he simply survive? My guess is he stays as Labour leader, but he's damaged in the country. Let's see what Daniel in Marylebone makes of all of this. Good evening, Daniel.
Hey, good evening, Nigel. What do I make of it? I mean, just listening to the last caller, I stopped the world. I want to get off. I don't know how you have the patience to take that last call.
Well, I did say I was shocked of Leicester Square. I couldn't quite believe what he was saying.
I couldn't believe it. I nearly fell over. I mean, my own view, and
I'll do that later.
You made a point just now about this. Even people that are huge Palestinian fans, anti-Israeli, can kind of side with Corbyn on this. I don't know how you side with him when some of these men committed hostage-taking and murder in Germany. This was nothing to do with in Palestine and in Israel. This was an act of terrorism outside another country.
It was.
My actual point is as follows. The rest of the world must be looking at this this gentleman who's sitting as the leader of the opposition, potentially electable, who won't get on his knees or bow to the Queen or sing our national anthem, but he will fly around the world to lay wreaths for convicted, self-appointed terrorists. They must be thinking to themselves, as a global audience, what is going on in the UK and how can this ever happen? It's laughable. I mean,
so you think? So you see this damaging our standing on the world stage, yeah?
Well, let me ask you: if you were the leader of France and you had to take a call with the guy you know bows down to terrorists, doesn't bow down to the monarchy of his own country, what would you think of it? You wouldn't trust him as far as you could throw it.
Probably.
If you were the leader of a terrorist training camp,
you'd find every excuse not to have the conversation. Daniel, you've made your point. On the world stage, this does not look pretty, does not look good. Will is a new caller to this show. He lives in Reading. Good evening.
Hi, Nigel. I think one thing that your call has just missed then, and that it's just what I'm finding ridiculous, is that people are comparing the laying of the wreath on one grave, and they're using the media storm and all the other headlines that have come out, and with basically saying that he's been laying them at terrorist graves as the same thing. But I can't get my head around it. But I think the main problem.
I fully accept that. When you have a national newspaper that is against your political position, they will give you a tough time, and you will be accused of guilt by association. Hey, it's happened to me many, many times, and I get that, Will. What I don't get is why, knowing some of the people who were buried in that cemetery and the appalling terrorist acts they committed, why Corbyn simply didn't absent himself from the wreath laying. Doesn't that show, Will, very, very bad judgment?
No, because I think actually what he saw at that place where he went to, which was, you're saying, is a Palestinian martyrs place.
Yeah.
It's actually a place where people who died in Palestine were being commemorated. And that actually, the problem here, Nigel, it's a huge problem. It's not just one national newspaper, it's all of the national newspapers, including The Guardian, who do not back Jeremy Corbyn on this. And I think the problem is that no one is being an accepted critic of Israel. I mean, imagine back when the South African apartheid was going on, if the Labour MPs and leaders were being shut down because Labour friends of South Africa weren't letting them say something. I mean, there would have been an uproar, but because Israel is...
Well, everybody was critical of apartheid, and even more critical of Ian Smith and Rhodesia, even though he didn't support apartheid. But I don't get that direct comparison. Well, at very best, this man who leads the Labour Party, which I'm guessing is your party... it's for the first time that I've ever seen... So are you one of the £3 members, Will, that joined fairly recently?
I'm not a member now because I don't agree with all of Labour directly. I mean, I'd vote for them in an election.
Okay.
But I'm not sure because I'm actually against... There's a huge swathe of Blairite MPs that are blocking...
He does. But, Will, would you accept my point that he has displayed very bad judgment in laying a wreath in that place, knowing there were some people in there who were absolute outright terrorist murderers, and that when it came out, the shifty display he gave yesterday shows actually he's not quite the kind of straight-talking guy people thought?
I think it's been blown out of proportion by the national...
All right, no, OK, Will, you've made your point, you've made it very clearly, and thank you for calling the show. Corbyn stated he was paying respect to the victims of terrorism. Was he at the memorials of the Brighton bombing? Second time tonight that point's been made, and I think it is a very, very powerful one. Andrea says, if Corbyn should offer the press a cup of tea like Boris did, he would be fine. Very good. That all started, I understand, when the Krays, the East End gangsters, were under police surveillance in the 1960s, and their mum, Vi, went out across the street to the unmarked car with a tray of tea. That was when I first heard of that story. Boris, I have to say, did carry it off rather well the other day. Sue says, Labour will not survive with Corbyn at the helm. He should step down. It's the only way Labour might get a chance at number 10. Sue, he will not be stepping down. Tina says Labour are not electable. Trailing behind the incompetent Tories in the polls says it all about their future. Well, we've got very strong opinions for the second night in a row on both sides of this. What is really clear to me is that those of you that are paid-up Labour supporters and Corbynistas, you are absolutely rock solid behind him, and that's kind of what I rather thought. Let's take our last caller of the evening. It's Robert, another new caller to the show. He lives in Marylebone as well. Robert, hello.
Nigel, you're brilliant.
Well, that's very kind of you, Robert.
I'll tell you why people listen to you and are addicted to this show. It's because you're so reasonable. You never lose your rag, unlike many other people one could think. Now, the reason I'm ringing is it's nearly 8 o'clock, is this.
Yep.
This last wreath laying, you can argue either way, as you've just proved over the last 25 minutes. What we need to do to make the case against Corbyn, if I may suggest, Nigel, is to put this as one pinpoint against a dozen other pinpoints. And what you have with 12 pinpoints, you have a pattern.
Yes.
And that pattern makes the case so strongly against Corbyn that it's incontrovertible.
Yet he seems to support a whole series of causes that have used violence to perpetuate their goals.
Seems to have or
has done, and yet at the same time, Robert, he can't sing the national anthem and has got very little good to say about our country.
Yes. Well, those are two more points in the pattern.
Yeah. So, Robert, do you agree with my analysis that this damages Jeremy Corbyn in Middle England, Middle Scotland and Middle Wales, but makes almost no difference to his position as Labour Party leader?
I think if people push the pattern, he'll go. If you go on one incident that is arguable either way, he may very well stay because his supporters will stay with him because they think, oh, well, there's doubt here. If you put the pattern, Nigel, in your last 3 minutes, they will feel, no, it's too much, he must go.
Okay.
Even his supporters.
Robert, thank you very much indeed for your call. Robert, there are another new caller, nearly all of you tonight. New callers to the show, new or old, you're all welcome.